Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin has proposed direct talks with Ukraine on May 15th in Istanbul, that should be aimed at achieving a durable peace and eliminating the root causes of the war. He said that Russia was proposing direct talks with Ukraine in Istanbul to achieve the restoration of a long-term lasting peace. Major European powers have thrown their weight behind an unconditional 30-day Ukraine ceasefire on Saturday, with the US President Donald Trump backing it and threatened Putin with massive new sanctions if he did not accept within days. For some analysis, we're joined now by Thembisa Fakude, who's Senior Research Fellow and Director for Africa-Asia Dialogues. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, looking at who's backing this, the European Union is pretty much saying that the ball is now in Russia's court. What's your reaction to these latest developments?
I think these are very interesting times in terms of trying to resolve the conflict currently in Ukraine. President Vladimir Putin is sitting on the back foot. He has indicated he's the one who actually pushing for a direct talks with Volodymyr Zelensky, who has indicated that he's willing to meet Vladimir Putin in Istanbul for direct talks personally. And at the same time, we have President Donald Trump, who's also putting pressure on both presidents to start these talks. The latest reports we had was directed at Volodymyr Zelensky, saying he has to accept the invitation to hold these direct talks in Istanbul immediately. So things seem to be moving. And now that the United States has got interest after signing that deal with Ukraine on the rare minerals in Ukraine, you are likely, therefore, to have this discussion starting in earnest, because the United States is now vested in Ukraine, and I think the world over, including the European Union, would like to see these discussions starting in earnest.
Yeah. What we do know is that Russia has insisted that before considering a ceasefire, the West must first halt its military aid to Ukraine. And we also heard the Kremlin spokesperson saying that they have to think this through, and trying to pressure Russia is quite useless. I mean, looking at that aspect, what does it signify in terms of Russia's approach and standing in this matter?
Well, Russia's got no choice at the moment, and it's a very expensive war. And I think, notwithstanding other reports of an emboldened Vladimir Putin, the war has been quite expensive, and I think Donald Trump came quite handy for Vladimir Putin in terms of pushing for the resolution in this conflict, because I don't think Vladimir Putin would have continued to sustain these attacks and the war in Ukraine, notwithstanding, of course, if you remember in 2022 when that whole thing started, it was supposed to be in and out war. But here we are now, 2025, the war is still going on, and Ukrainians are holding their positions and fighting to maintain the integrity of their country.
Yeah.
So Vladimir Putin, I think he was not going to throw this opportunity away, the opportunity that has been facilitated by, amongst others, Donald Trump. Is going to grab this opportunity. Of course, there is a demand that he must accept the 30-day ceasefire, and he's rejected that. But by all looks of things, the discussions will start tomorrow, and on Thursday, we are likely to see both Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin meeting for the first time in direct talks in Istanbul.
With that, I mean, the meeting will continue, but so far, looking at what's been said about the ceasefire, we know that President Trump has said that if the ceasefire is not respected, the US and its partners will impose further sanctions. Can Russia afford these additional sanctions, just looking at the impact of the sanctions already in place?
Well, they can't, but judging by the past, or the reports, and I was in Russia and Kazan some couple of months ago, it's all systems go with that country. You wouldn't even think that there are sanctions against Russia. So Russian economy has not been impacted that much, because they've got alternative takers of their goods, particularly oil and gas. So they have managed to an extent to sustain themselves, notwithstanding these harsh economic sanctions that have been imposed not only by the Europeans but also by the Americans. But I think Vladimir Putin wants normalization. We saw him last week when he hosted the international community, or some of the leaders from various countries in the celebration of the Victory Day of the Second World War. So he wants to come back and he wants to normalize relations. We already have also some of the leaders around the world, including the Canadians, calling for him to be accepted back into G7, which is going to be G8. So there are those overtures extended to him by global leaders, and I think he is likely to take those opportunities and go back into becoming part of the members of the international community, because it's been very lonely for him and it's been quite difficult for him to continue operating as normal given the sanctions that's been imposed against Russia.
And in terms of the ripple effect, what would the success of these talks mean for countries like us here in South Africa?
Well, first of all, there's going to be an opening of exports from ourselves to Russia without vying other countries to reach Russia. Number two is there's going to be an open business, which I think is very important, between countries such as ourselves, Africa, and others with Russia, because the sanctions are actually quite biting. Not only is Russia unable to even use some of the maritime transportation around the world because of these sanctions. So if this happens, it's likely to open up that business, which is very important. I think it's going to be a path towards the acceptance and normalization of Vladimir Putin once again, and we might just have his case at the ICC withdrawn. Who knows? But I think it's an important step towards the right direction. And if Vladimir Putin does show positivity and a willingness to resolve this issue, I think you are likely to have that problem solved, but importantly, you're likely to have him back into the international community. And I think it's probably going to play a much more critical role in terms of resolving the global issues.
Very well. Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. Wrapping up that discussion as we take a look at the implications of a potential meeting. Thembisa Fakude, who's Senior Research Fellow and Director of Africa-Asia Dialogues, expanding that conversation.